Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Lydia Ramsey Pflanzer, and I'm a healthcare editor at Business Insider, and we're here to chat about the world of healthcare investing 7 months into a pandemic. It's a time where it feels like so much has changed, but life finds a way to carry on, and so have healthcare investments. By the end of the third quarter, digital health startups in particular had a record year, with companies raising $9.4 billion to date, according to Rock Health. But the challenges are different. For some young startups, it's keeping the lights on when focuses change and projects get stalled because of the pandemic. Others have focused on ways to position their business to tackle the pandemic head on. Lest we forget, there's also an election coming up in just a month. In what might be the understatement of the year, it's an interesting time to be in healthcare investing. So joining me to chat about this today, we've got an all-star group of investors. We've got Dr. Joe Cunningham, founding managing partner at Santé Ventures, Mudit Jain, founder and general partner at Strategic Health Investments Partners, Alexis G, partner at Illumina Ventures, Dave Neustaedter, vice president of venture capital at Medtronic, and Christina Simmons, chief of staff at Closely Ventures. Now I need to take a break. But thank you guys so much for joining us. One of the things I wanted to kick off with today is by getting a taste of what life is like for a venture capitalist right now. You know, what's a typical day like for you? What are you spending your time focused on? Alexis, let's start with you, since I know you're up bright and early this morning.
Yeah, sure. So I guess for now, a lot of time and I spend were on looking at the companies and also fundraising, because we are in the process of raising a new fund and we are half closed. We hope to close it by early next year. And also evaluating company on a daily basis is our job. Probably I spend at least half of my time talking with a company on the phone as of now. Yeah.
It's a lot of phone calls. Joe, how about you?
Yeah, so a lot less time on airplanes than I've spent in the last 20 years, and that's not all a bad thing. It's short of Zoom meetings from morning to evening. We closed the fund last year, so we're not fundraising, which is nice. But lots of time looking at new companies, managing the companies that we already have in our portfolio, and learning to do that with less interpersonal touching, but still trying to keep those relationships strong.
Sure, for sure. Dave, how about you out here on the West Coast or East Coast?
Right. No, I echo everything that's been said. You know, we share a facility with some of Medtronic's R&D, and it's been less important for us to occupy that space than our R&D folks. So been 100% work from home. And I think maybe this was implied in some of the other comments, but some of our portfolio companies have been thinking a lot about how to manage burn due to the crisis, et cetera. So a higher percentage of our time focused on portfolio companies, but still very actively looking at new opportunities as well.
For sure. And Mudit, how about you? How are things in Scranton?
Yeah, no, Lydia, first of all, thanks for having me over here. And, I think it's very similar to what you heard from Joe and Dave and Alexis. We are in the process of closing our first fund. So obviously we have been actively fundraising. But along with that, we have built a portfolio of close to 6 companies at this point in time. They're focusing on those companies, and some of them are really early stage and some of them are commercial stage. So a variety of mix there. And beyond that, I think it's just looking at a few additional investment opportunities. So, it's a lot of time spent on new opportunities as well.
Sure, for sure. Christina, how about you? Where do you fall on this?
Zoom meetings. At the beginning of COVID, it was mostly focused at working with companies on figuring out their burn management plan, or making sure that through COVID, we were either using their technology to address different solutions around COVID-19, or just to look at their strategy and then new investments. And nothing for us has changed too much on that front. We're still looking for radical innovation within healthcare.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it sounds like a whole spectrum of tasks and things to be focused on. But one of the things in particular that I thought was particularly interesting, and maybe this is me coming from my reporting brain, but it sounds like it's a lot more time spent on portfolio companies than maybe other times of the life. Christina, I want to talk a little bit about that. You mentioned some of your folks kind of striking out into kind of addressing the pandemic head on. What's it been like to work with portfolio companies at a time like this?
Yeah, so I believe with every adversity could come opportunity, and so many of our companies, I believe at this point it's about 28 of our companies who have either used their technology or their platform to address different solutions around COVID, whether it is color genomics and they are enabling faster testing. I just did mine last week. I got my results back in 15 hours, or Opentrons, which is doing fully automated PCR testing. They can do 2,400 tests a day, or LiveCore, which is addressing faster, both telemedicine and using ECG to track various heart conditions, or Ginger.io, which is addressing quite a bit around mental health during this time period. So it's been a range.
Yeah, that's interesting. Dave, I wanted to chat a little bit about, I think yesterday we were chatting a little bit in preparation for this, and it sounds like, portfolio companies are coming for a range of different asks and things. Like, how do you end up supporting some of the companies you've invested in before the pandemic hit?
Sure, and we're always a minority investor out of this group at Medtronic, so it's always part of what we do as part of a board and part of a shareholder base. But to your point, we are seeing a lot of that, and I think the kinds of companies that we invest in are probably overlapping, but largely distinct from the ones Christine is talking about. And if you've got a women's health company or a cardiology company that's 10 years into a product development cycle and they're doing a pivotal study, it's tough for them to adapt to take advantage of COVID. Most of the significance is on the downside. It's the effect of substantially reduced clinical trial enrollment if they happen to be commercial stage. It's been a lot tougher for small companies that are early in a commercial launch to get in front of customers and to get consideration by customers during the crisis. So those are the kinds of issues that we've been talking a lot about as boards. And, I think the two primary consequences when you get right down to it have been trying to figure out how to manage burn and try to figure out, how to get a little extra money, but at the same time, really limiting the impact on the plans of the company.
Right, for sure. Mudit, have you experienced something similar, totally different?
Yeah, so I'm a very medical device focused investor, and I think medical devices had a COVID-like issue or worse issue from 2008 to 2014. So our industry really went through a structural change on the venture side in medical devices. And I think coming out of that, we have learned enough that, again, 2019, and trust me, COVID is a serious issue and is obviously impacting all of us. It impacts our portfolio companies depending on the stage. But in the big scheme of things, what we went through from 2008 to 2014, I think that has really helped our industry, especially the ecosystem, evolve and be able to deal with these relatively short-term blips, hopefully. And the long and short of that is it leads to the kinds of investments you make, the kinds of syndicates you put. So we are doing Series A investments where we are really biotech-like financings, raising $35 million for Alex, raising $36 million for a chronic migraine company. Because what we are trying to do is take out a lot of the risk that Dave pointed out here from the equation and have the capability to get the company to a meaningful milestone. So I think COVID in that sense has not changed a whole lot. It has had obviously some impact on how the portfolio companies are working, and it depends again on the stage. So if it's an early R&D stage company, we are probably seeing sort of a reduction to 90% efficacy for those companies to meet the milestones, but accordingly lower burn. So I think those have not been impacted. The companies that have been impacted are really the ones which are in the midst of a clinical trial or early commercialization. And I think, again, the whole theory for us has been that, form large syndicates, so you take out some of these financing and timing risk and allow the companies to have longer runway. So that's been our strategy, and that's sort of playing out well because, again, I do think Medtech industry, especially on the VC ecosystem side, that time frame from 2008 to 2014 really learned us how to be lean and mean.
Makes sense. Joe, have you experienced something similar?
Yeah, so we do early stage investing and across the board for, we've got a virtual health company that has had astronomical growth. It's better to be lucky than good, I guess. And for our medical device and biotech companies, it's finding ways to accrue to clinical trials. There's things like, we're more likely now to do South America, where we can charter a plane and fly our equipment and personnel down to a place to do a first in man, where we can get everybody on the plane and get there sort of in an easier trip. We've done a lot less in Eastern Europe than we might normally have done because of that. It's paying really close attention to the environment of wherever you're doing the clinical trial. Again, these tend to be early stage clinical trials to be sure that you can accrue. Obviously, things like lockdowns on non-elective surgeries have a big impact, and so it's sort of daily. And like my friend Dave, we tend to be majority investors, and so the blending of whether you're an investor or an operator is a lot fuzzier, as Dave knows, with us, and so we get pretty engaged in a lot of those activities. But the good thing about venture capital is the same as the bad thing. It's a feature or bug. It takes a long time, and so there's plenty to do. It's not like you get up each day with any of these portfolio companies and say, oh, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't do this. Generally, there's a lot of stuff to work on. We have done iterations of devices where we've gone further on the iterations before going and doing a clinical trial, where we might have gone ahead and done something, come back and iterated. We go ahead and iterate on animals, and then when we go to humans, we're further along the process.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, it sounds like, it's portfolio companies are coming, this is probably no surprise, with a range of questions for their investors and how they want to be supported. Alexis, what's like the big question you're getting from your portfolio companies these days? What are they coming to you for help with?
Yeah, I think there are two buckets of a company. One is who are in early R&D stage. They are less affected by COVID. So another bucket are companies who are in commercializing stage or are in clinical trial. So their operations are more affected. So from the very beginning, we kind of asked our company to take quick, bold actions to cut costs, lean out their structure, and build really extreme downside scenario to prepare for really worst revenue decline. Also, we encourage our company to not only play defense, but also offense. How to really come out of this crisis with even more lean and more efficient structures. It could really become better in all areas and to outperform competitors out of the crisis. So I think a lot of companies in our portfolio really reacted very nicely. So I think a crisis to some people, right, some companies really means opportunity. So I think a number of our portfolio companies really grasped the opportunity and really done tremendously well in responding to COVID. So I guess how we can help them either, give them more money if they're really raising money, try to extend the runway so that they can go through the colder winter, or to help them really think about how to creatively outperform competitors and respond positively to the crisis.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I want to get into that funding piece a little bit more. We've talked a little bit about, making sure you have enough burn rates and, having enough cash on hand to kind of weather the storm or of sorts. Dave, who's coming to you looking for funding? What's kind of the circumstance in which, maybe an existing investment or maybe a new investment is coming to you asking like, hey, we'd like some more and this is how we're planning to use it.
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty interesting, I think. First, anybody who normally would be looking for money, I think is. I'm not sure if there is a slightly smaller cohort of startups this year, or probably just different ones. But layered on top of the usual mix that you would see, folks who've had 2 to 3 years since their last round and just need more money inevitably. I think there are all the companies that we've been talking about that have not been able to reduce their burn proportionately to the business objectives such as clinical trial enrollment. So those companies, a lot of them we're finding are looking for top-ups just to reduce the risk that they're going to be 90% of the way through their pivotal trial and having to deal with the financing then. So there are a lot of folks looking for money right now, I think, and that's, I think from a venture perspective, that is opportunity.
For sure. Joe, how are you approaching it? And you mentioned being, operator. Is it kind of staying focused on the portfolio companies at hand, or are you looking out beyond?
Yeah, so both. We have been very diligent in matching the burn rate of the company to the environment that it's operating in, and that's gone pretty well. I would say 6 months in, I'm feeling pretty good about that because we had to bridge a few companies, but we've been successful in fundraising. We're not going to get through this quickly, though. So by next summer, I think that's going to accentuate a lot of the issues that we're talking about. And one of the things we've spent a fair amount of time discussing is a lot of what we do now works really well with Zoom and virtual visits. But now then you're getting to the point where, because it's so long stage and we tend to have relationships with these people a long time, we tend to have relationships with our fellow investors. I've been doing this for decades. And so you have those relationships. We're now at that point where you're starting to look at investing in companies with people that you've never met in person, and that makes a difference. That's a change as this goes on. And the other thing, for those of us, unlike Dave and I, that have been doing this for decades and know each other well, there's a new generation of investors who are our younger guys that aren't getting that chance to go out and build networks and spend time. And so I think as this progresses, you'll begin to see that go. Now, hopefully by a year from now, we're back more to a normal environment and we just go on. But there are things that you change when you're in a more virtual environment, when you're not getting on the planes, having the dinners, having the network meetings. For the last 10 years, this meeting, I've been in Cleveland, and so not doing that will have more impact as it goes on.
I feel you. I've started to suddenly miss having casual networking drinks. A thing I used to dread. It's such a weird situation. Christina, one of the big questions I've had for a bit of time, seeing some of the big fundraisings happening, especially in digital health, is who's having trouble raising. What's your read on the companies that aren't, landing that deal or landing that big check? What are they missing?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a spectrum of different types of companies, as Alexis was saying, early R&D, and then companies who are commercializing. For us, we tend to get less excited about the smaller incremental innovation and more around what's really disruptive, what are harder technology problems to solve. And so those companies tend to have a much longer R&D cycle. And so that's one area, whether they have realized that it's taking longer for them to either do clinical studies or to get to the technology to where they need it to be. Or on the flip side, we have good problems where companies have had breakthroughs in product innovation and they say, okay, we've actually found this entirely different product. We want to raise more for this. And so it is getting investors around the mindset of what is our vision. Some of our companies stopped fundraising right at the beginning of COVID and said, okay, let's pause. Let's wait to see how the environment's shaking out. So those companies are now fundraising. And then we have other companies who, just to reduce risk, decided to fundraise early. And part of that is really sitting down and not saying, okay, let's fundraise for the sake of fundraising. Typically it's, we sit down early and say, what are the milestones that they need to meet, and what does that look like, and how much capital is required in different scenarios, whether it's more conservative or aggressive cases, and we'll work with them. And sometimes they accelerate it, sometimes they're slower. And we believe in working really closely with them on thinking through that fundraising strategy. And I would say the one of the mistakes startups make early, and where we spend a lot of time coaching them, is say, okay, over the next 24 months, where do you need the most advice or thought partners at the table? And let's prioritize going after investors who can add the most strategic value to the company in addition to us. And that's how we think about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How long was that kind of pause early on in the pandemic? Was it like a couple of weeks? I feel like I didn't really feel it as a reporter.
We didn't notice it too much. Our investment strategy hasn't changed. We wrote our healthcare thesis. Vinod did. It's a paper called 20% Doctor Included 6 years ago, something like that, and it hasn't changed. But during COVID, we did have some companies who said, okay, there are smaller funds who are pausing their investments and let's wait a few months. But overall, not too much has changed. I believe the environment has been even more active. I don't know about all of the other investors on the call, but it's been quite a bit of our portfolio companies focused on fundraising and then quite a bit of new investments.
Yeah, that's interesting. This gives me an idea. Hopefully this doesn't go poorly, but because we have such a big panel, maybe this will work out. It'd be cool to do a flash poll. Do you guys think fundraising in healthcare is overactive right now or less active than a year ago? You can thumbs up or thumbs down to give your poll.
Lydia, data shows that.
Dave, why are you a thumbs down?
Well, maybe how one frames the question. I think more companies are looking for cash. So in that regard, it would be thumbs up. But I think some percentage of funds are still a little ginger about making new investments. I think the first 2 months of COVID, we saw that was sort of 50-50 with some folks stepping back. I think folks have been coming in more, but there are some firms that are still a little less active in my view.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I think when you look at the data, it doesn't show that. I think medical devices, we are sort of flat compared to last year. We did around 3 billion first half of this year, which was really pretty much on pace for 6 billion we did last year. So I think from our industry perspective, it's relatively flat. I don't think we are seeing a whole lot of decrease or increase.
But how much of that is filling the gap with portfolio companies, which I think is sort of
investments. Yeah, there's a lot of new investments as well there.
Yeah, absolutely, but a different mix.
It's interesting.
I'm not sure what different mix is, but
for us, actually, we invested probably at a little bit of faster speed this year than last year. So I guess from March to August, we invested in 5 new companies. Kind of had unprecedented speed compared to previous years. So at the same time, we had a significant reserve for our existing portfolio companies. Yeah, I would say probably similar compared to previous years.
Gotcha.
I would say that it's similar. There are some areas that we've doubled down in more, whether it's this telemedicine plus AI theme or new ways or faster ways for drug discovery using AI or therapeutics. And I would also say diagnostics. And so those are the areas that we've been focusing more than ever.
Right. So in a lot of ways, maybe it's like this interesting shift, but like on the whole, maybe still generally not, there's no cliff where like funding has fallen off completely. That seems to be for sure. That's interesting. But I wanted to get back to something, Joe, you mentioned a little bit about diligence and about introductions and what it means to kind of meet with new contacts and new companies for the first time over Zoom. It's been 7 months since we started social distancing. I want to get a sense of how you guys are approaching diligence on vetting deals. Mudit, maybe let's start with you. What's your approach to getting a handle on, potential new investments at this point?
Yeah, so it's again, just as everything we have talked here has been a mix. It's all virtual. We are not doing any meetings in person. Our investments, just to give you a flavor, one was on the East Coast. We are based on the West Coast. One we are just about closing. It's in the Bay Area itself. Both are sort of commercial, clinical stage companies, companies that we have known for a long time. So there was a certain comfort level with either the syndicate members who have been there, and being later stage, there's a lot of history with the company. So, I think those are a little bit easier for us to do. We did also do an early stage investments earlier this year, which we have known again for some time. So I think we're generally more comfortable getting into new investments where we have either known the team or the syndicate members. And there's certain trust factor that's built in. So we don't have to necessarily meet in person. Brand new, some email pitch from somebody I don't know. those are tough to get excited about. And again, it all goes down to, I don't think it has really changed the diligence process. What it has changed is really sort of, just doing a lot of Zoom or go to meetings versus meeting in person. It does take away it does pose some challenges where you have to actually go visit some facility and visit some, see some products, maybe see a procedure. That has become challenging. But I think, we are imaginative enough that we can figure those things out to some extent just through, virtual meetings and so forth. So it really hasn't impacted the process a whole lot, but it has definitely impacted the kinds of companies and the teams that we are backing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe raise of hands. Has anybody been doing any sort of in-person meetings to kind of with anything? Yeah. What's that like, Joe?
So we do mask and social distancing, and we've even designed our offices where we've got barriers, but we do have some in-person meetings. We pay a lot of attention to safety in that. I would say the point that it made that I would agree with, though, is the investments that we've made have been generally with people that we have known for a long time. We tend to follow companies for a long time, and so we're investing in relationships and people and syndicates where there's already a comfort factor, and that's what I was saying earlier. As this goes on, you're going to have to make that move.
Alexis, I know you're based in the Bay Area. I might have missed your hand, but have you been doing any in person, or is it all still virtual for you?
Well, I met a couple people, I guess, for a short period when people think, hey, the virus is going to be gone, but quickly really came back home. Yeah, I haven't met anybody in person. Yeah, but I think since COVID, I probably attended, many more conferences online than I did before personally. Yeah, just because previously we have to think about the logistics, right? Being in a particular place, at a certain time, but now everything's virtual. So that's a great way of meeting with people. I guess in terms of evaluating new companies, so I guess a lot of factors will be considered regarding the reputation of the team, and probably do a better reference check, right, about the team members, and really probably put more weight on co-investors, right, whether we are comfortable working with them together. So in terms of doing diligence for technical things, so I guess that remains largely unchanged.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, I my understanding was, it's very reputation driven before we all went virtual, but it sounds like it makes sense that it would be a big area to lean on now to look at new investments. Christina, how has your process around diligence changed or not changed in this virtual world?
Yeah, it hasn't changed too much. We have a somewhat different process for earlier stage versus later stage. And in a similar way, if anything, doing Zoom meetings back to back has made us more efficient. The downside is it's a bit more straight to the point. You don't have that really having that personal connection or going for a walk. So there's a downside there. For us, it's either two areas. Similar to what Alexis was saying, the team matters even more. So making sure that we feel really comfortable spending more time with back channel references. And then on the technology side, do we think for early stage, do we feel like this technology or science is likely to happen, or does it make sense for us? And what are the risks there and milestones? So we've had a higher bar, but we've spent more time asking those strategic questions and spending time even virtually with the team in creative ways. I've even had more Airbnb experiences with founders, or trying to do something a little bit different so it's not just a repetitive, typical meeting.
Airbnb experiences like the events they host are virtual?
Yeah, the online experiences have had to be creative with ways that you can get to know the person, not just in the meeting room. But I will say it is the positive side is that you can see what's behind the screen. So you can see their family in the background or their cat. So you get a bit more feel about their life.
For sure. Yeah. We've talked a lot about, investing and diligence and making sure companies in the portfolio are doing pretty well. But when we look back in 5 to 10 years, one thing I've been thinking a lot about these days is what are we going to regret missing out on because we've been social distancing. We haven't been able to do these kind of in-person meetings, things like that. Dave, what's kind of your read on that?
Yeah, wow, that's a big one. And let me make sure I understand the question right. You're probably not talking about what I'm missing out with my kids or my friends, et cetera. You're talking about what I'm missing out in terms of venture investing because of the gap here.
I guess both are applicable here, but
yeah.
more specific to investing.
So, honestly, I think we really see this as hopefully a very transient period. So definitely see an impact. And maybe to answer the flip side of your question first, I think it's an opportunity in the language Joe is using to build even stronger relationships with our portfolio CEOs and as Alexis and Mudit were saying, build stronger companies. But in terms of what we miss out, I do think that there will be a gap in the number of important new relationships we build. I do think there is going to be a quantitative impact. I'm not sure yet what it's going to be. I'll be curious whether you could look 5 years from now, 10 years from now at returns on investments made over the period from, say, June of this year to June of next year, whether it's going to be higher, lower, the same, I don't know. As Christina was saying, this is more efficient. So is that going to have positive effects? I really don't know is the bottom line, but I think there will be impacts.
Mudit, how about you? I know it sounds like you've been following along with trends and investing in a while. Are we in 2008 territory? Are we in something totally different?
Yeah. Again, I kind of echo Dave's sentiments there that it's tough to predict, but I know that our industry specifically is driven by the fact that the world is getting older, which it will continue to. It's getting heavier, which it will continue to. And that's becoming a global phenomenon. And those will be our dominant sort of drivers for innovation. That's where we serve in medical device industry. And those trends are not going away, be it COVID, post-COVID. So from an industry perspective, I think the demographics, the favorable demographics we have, that will continue. And then specifically to our industry, there was a lot of positive news during this COVID-19. CMS announced coverage for medical devices for 4 years if you have an FDA breakthrough device designation. I can't tell you how big that is. I mean, that is really big for our industry. This is an industry that has struggled through reimbursement challenges, through FDA challenges. And to have that big issue taken off, I think it's, coming out of COVID-19 and just happens that it coincided with COVID-19, but that's a big positive momentum for the industry. We'll find out what COVID-19 has done to people, especially when it comes to their cardiovascular health, their respiratory health, their neurovascular health, and we'll probably find that there are some long-term consequences of COVID-19. And I think there will be innovation on the therapeutic side for devices to handle those. Will that be still the dominant part of what we do? Probably not, based on the drivers that I described earlier.
For sure. Alexis, I know Christina's got her Airbnb experiences. Have you found a good substitute for in-person networking?
Yeah, well, a lot of online virtual conferences for sure. So yeah, otherwise I haven't really found a good channel. Yeah. But I think I was thinking maybe 5 to 10 years later when I look back at this COVID, I think probably several things will probably remain in my memory. One, I have unprecedented a time to spend with the family. Yeah, for a long period of time, it's really to treasure the balance between work and life. That's memorable. I think a second is COVID is really a catalyst to accelerate some of the areas, for example, telemedicine, telehealth, consumer testing service. So I think COVID is really causes a leapfrog change in customer behavior. So previously we were thinking about, hey, telemedicine or how a business model really works. And I think because of COVID, we now realize that there was a need for such thing. So I think that's a dramatic change to the healthcare investment field. Yeah, and so maybe the third thing I would remember is usually during a crisis, how people respond probably give you a really deep impression. I think I was tremendously proud of all the really good work our portfolio companies have been doing responding to COVID, either developing diagnostics tests or vaccine or antibody, or providing research tools for COVID research. So I guess I would probably, in my investment career, think more of those strong companies who can respond to a crisis and come stronger will be really good company. Those are the examples I probably will use to guide my future investment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to go back to something you said about, telemedicine and investing in digital health. It seems like as kind of a third party sitting outside reporting on the space, a lot of companies that I kind of, folks would tell me they're a little bit dubious of the business or just like hadn't quite been proven out. It seems like over the past 7 months, they've become like really accepted. You've seen telemedicine really take off, and then we've seen big mergers and Amwell went public, things like that. We've also seen direct to consumer companies really take off with Hims going public and Roe getting major investments. How are you guys grappling with that, as investors? I know, Joe, you mentioned one of your virtual health companies has been taking off. Is this something that you're looking to invest more in the future?
Yeah, so I think that I'd go up a little bit. I think that there has been a profound change from COVID and how primary care in particular is delivered. And one thing that happened is that with primary care, there was a dramatic reduction in the amount of and visits, 40 to 60% reduction in visits. And primary care operates on a thin enough margin that created a real problem, particularly for those independent physicians and physician groups not affiliated with the health system. And if you're a big payer, you like the independent physicians so that the health systems have, and so they jumped in and changed the way that they were paying primary care doctors. All of that boils down to more of a change to value-based reimbursement. I think it's acted as an accelerant that you will see over the next year or two to value-based reimbursement, particularly for primary care. And virtual visits, in my opinion, fit into that. So if you are just a telemedicine company, those have never been shown to do a lot, with apologies to all those companies and their investors, but they don't fill in gaps in care, change outcomes, or even reduce costs that much. They're just sort of an additional layer. I think the key difference is, instead of it just being a telemedicine visit, it's got to be part of the healthcare delivery system. It's got to be access to the healthcare system. And that means it can't just be virtual visits. It can't just be house calls. It can't just be urgent care. It's got to be part of that continuum of care. And so the concept of, I may start with a virtual visit, but what I'm doing is solving my problem. I'm gaining access to the system. I have an advocate and a navigator to help me get the right care that I need. So I think that those systems that are doing that are part of the healthcare system rather than a layer between you and the healthcare system are going to be the ones that are more successful. And we're seeing a lot of that. And as Christina said, you add this profound, overhyped at this point, but underappreciated in the longer term, artificial intelligence and the impact that's having on healthcare, with medical decision support, with imaging, with all these things. Christina and I share the view that it's too hard to build a new company, takes too long, takes too much money. You don't want to do that for a marginal incremental change. You only want to do that for things that, boy, if this works, it changes everything. I can't imagine anything worse than working that hard to get something, and when you get to the end, nobody cares. So we're looking for profoundly transformational things that improve. And I think the area of primary care delivery is a big area that we're looking for in that.
For sure. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with Joe, this idea of it has to be connected back into the health system versus, kind of be its own layer?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. I mean, we really believe that the best innovation comes outside of the healthcare system. And there are different drivers that force the healthcare system to adopt it or partner. And healthcare is broken. It's been broken. COVID has allowed us to reimagine areas in healthcare. As Joe is saying, we really believe that AI will transform healthcare, whether it's making healthcare more affordable or better results or more accessibility. And instead of it being specialty by specialty, we're realizing that the need is even greater today, whether it is our company Ginger.io and using AI to connect you even faster in 35 seconds to a therapist versus waiting 35 days, and faster, better results. And so we're just seeing this huge acceleration. Caption Health is doing AI-assisted ultrasounds. And so it's reducing the need to have healthcare workers be at risk. And so if anything, we're realizing that the need is even greater, and that those innovations outside of healthcare help drive real change within the system.
For sure. Yeah.
I have a very different view. I think, it's AI is not going to be the end all. And I think it's, with all due respect to my technology investors, we have been using AI in medical devices, and a lot of tech investors are probably not familiar. In pacemaker business, we have been doing this prediction and prevention since 90s. The only thing is, I think what is changing is the consumer end of healthcare. And I think that's where technology folks are playing very well, because that's a segment, we typically are catering sort of to the tertiary care, and the primary care, secondary care. That's where I think technology, as AI and others, will probably have a bigger impact, because it's lot larger populations. As far as data, we have always been doing it. So I'm kind of tired of hearing tech investors coming in and telling us that, oh, AI is here. AI has always been here. It's just that it has become cheaper and much more affordable, and you can do it on the consumer end. And I think that's a big role there. But as far as medical devices and tertiary care goes, there's only so much we can do with AI. We are pretty sharp engineers, scientists, and same people sitting on this side that are sitting on the tech side. There's a reason, unfortunately, why we don't have a 22-year-old entrepreneur, because guess what? Our industry is still heavily regulated. There's still reimbursement challenges. So we have to work with those confines. And that's the reason why an early, really young entrepreneur in our industry tends to be in the mid-30s. But AI is definitely there. It's going to change things. It's going to change some of the things we do. Is it going to have a dramatic impact and be the end all? No, absolutely not. It's overblown. I think it will have an important role and will continue to evolve. But that's sort of my take from the medtech side. I've been involved in digital health companies like iRhythm. And, it was really a device with using really what we had done in pacemaker industry in the 90s. It was the same people, actually. We recruited the same people who have been working on algorithms, who have been working on electrical signals and understanding arrhythmias and bringing it all together. So yeah, is that AI? Absolutely. Was that new to us? No, it's been there. It's just, again, as I said, it's becoming a lot more affordable and a lot of different platforms where you can leverage it.
For sure. I did forget that we have both healthcare-minded investors and for some of the more tech-focused. It's rare I get those two groups in the same room, so it's cool to hear the difference of opinions.
And healthcare investors are tech-minded too. Please don't get it wrong.
I know. Don't worry.
Yeah, I would add to that. I guess we would regard ourselves tech investors. However, about the consumer and the story, right? That's really happening. For example, just because of the COVID, so in April, we invested in a really at-home diagnostic testing company called Let's Get Checked. It's from an Irish company. So I guess they quickly pivoted to COVID and really because of a B2B partnership where their revenue really increased by order of magnitude. While at the same time, other diagnostic tests that's non-COVID really also become adopted quickly as well. So yeah, thinking about between healthcare and the tech investors. So I think we are, right, I guess probably have more overlap now than before and really getting into each other's field. Yeah, although we use probably different type of a word to describe the same thing. Yeah, but I think that's a positive trend, I guess. The more attention, right, to put into the field, the more innovation and the more resource and capital to support all those innovations.
For sure. Yeah, and you bring up a good point about, kind of the COVID diagnostics world and things like that. I've been thinking a lot, and I've been talking to investors over the past 6 months about this. Obviously, there's a ton of work being done to create new therapeutics. We saw, the president took one of Regeneron's new antibody treatments just Thursday or Friday, and we're seeing a lot of folks step up in the diagnostics games. Alexis, you mentioned Let's Get Checked. There's definitely a color as well. Christina mentioned them as well. At this point, like thinking forward looking, I guess, is this an area worth poking into? When thinking about making a new investment in a company, is this is investing in COVID as an idea or as like a therapeutic area or a diagnostic area a worthwhile bet for you guys? Dave, what do you think?
Certainly we think about that and get a lot of inbound from companies that are trying to do something really quickly to take advantage of COVID. And not all those companies are a fit with us. I think that, for example, for us to get into molecular diagnostics, just because it's important and timely, is maybe not the right thing. I think where my focus is when I think about opportunities to assist patients related to COVID, it's more along the lines of what Mudit was mentioning earlier. What are the long-term sequelae in the cardiovascular system and the neurological system going to be? And what are the implications going to be there for Medtech opportunities? We can't take advantage of all the COVID opportunities to help patients, but there are some that I think that we're probably the right company, the right environment, leveraging all that experience that Mudit was talking about.
What would be a good example of that?
Well, so, obviously respirators and ECMO, for example, would be a great fit with my company. But, we have strong established businesses that are very capable in those areas. So as part of the venture arm of my company, I'm almost more interested in those sort of longer term, newer opportunities that it was alluding to.
For sure. Joe, how about you? Maybe thinking about it from the therapeutics perspective.
Yeah, so generally, because we do early stage, it takes a long time. And so hopefully COVID will be a distant memory by the time most of our companies get there. So the timeframes just don't match up well for diagnostics and therapeutics. But just as my colleagues have said, we are very interested in the sequelae, the disease burden that's going to be a residual of this, and that's just fits in with the aging population. So we're looking at that, but not so much at the acute events.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And Alexis, thinking back to your example of Let's Get Checked, how much of it was, right place, right time? Had this been something you were planning to invest in for a while, or was it something that was brought on by COVID specifically?
Actually, both. Actually, even before COVID, we were looking at infectious disease companies in the diagnostics and therapeutic space, but with a lot of caution and hesitation, just because traditionally, really infectious disease investment has what was regarded as area that's really less profitable than with many scientific and business failures. But I think the COVID pandemic really has changed people's attitude towards really how serious, right, public health threats really infectious disease cause. I think that also creates a lot of investment opportunities. Besides Let's Get Checked, actually, before COVID, we were looking at a company that's doing antibiotics resistance testing. After talking with them for a while, we advised them to pivot to something that's related to pneumonia AST testing, and they did adopted our advice. And then during COVID, so they did make that change. So we did invest in that company. So I think so our investment thesis is typically focused on like a big platform that's applicable not only to one area of disease, but maybe many more areas of diseases, including infectious diseases. So I think that does open a channel for us to think more positively on infectious disease investment from now on.
For sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. And we only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to kind of end with a little bit of a lightning round style and thinking about, Alexis, what your point about infectious disease. I want to go around the group. I would say the room, but that does not quite describe what we're doing. What's one type of company or disease area, anything like that, that you're willing to invest in now that you might not have been willing to in before March? Christina, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, not too much has changed from our original thesis. I would say that the one company that we did invest that we perhaps didn't think about before was a company called E25 Bio, which is doing rapid tests to test COVID, similar to a pregnancy test at home. So that is one example of a breakthrough technology, and it's less around COVID and more around what can the platform enable in the next year or even 10 years. And so we look at what will be breakthrough technologies, not just now, but in 10 years, and focus on those areas that I had mentioned before, whether it's diagnostics, therapeutics, drug discovery, or telemedicine and addressing customer needs or patient needs.
For sure. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I would echo the part. I'm not sure there are fundamental differences in where we would invest today. I'd say that for us, there's this change in the financing environment we talked about. We have organizational changes going on. We've got a tremendously strong balance sheet and a lot of related expertise here internally. So for us, it's more of a question of what's changed in the opportunity landscape and how can we apply what we bring to the table to create the best investments that bring new therapies forward.
Sure. Alexis, how about you?
Yeah, point of care test, like Christina mentioned, consumer testing, telemedicine. Those will be the areas that I think I'm less hesitant to invest and for the future.
Totally. Mudit, how about you?
Yeah, so hopefully COVID is a year or 18-month blip for next 100 years. So I'm not sure how I can base my strategy for next 10, 15, 20 years based on COVID. Our focus hasn't changed. It will continue to be the same. So absolutely no change in our investment thesis and strategy and focus.
Sure. Joe, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say I agree with what people have said. The one area that I do think that it will have created this acceleration in value-based reimbursement. And so that's the one area we're looking more at is that my entire career, and I practiced medicine for a long time, we talked about value-based reimbursement. We just never did it. But I do believe that it will have accelerated that. We'll see in a couple of years.
Now's the time. Well, great. Well, thank you guys all for taking part in this conversation. It was fun to see a little differing of opinions. I always love to see that. And thanks to the Cleveland Clinic for having us. It was a great conversation. Hope you guys have a great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.